In this lesson, we're going to take a first look at how you can create layered materials in RenderMan using the Pixar Layer Surface. And I'm going to be using this bike frame to demonstrate this powerful feature to you, which the artists at Pixar use all the time, and it has some amazing effects like absorption inside refractions and a whole bunch of other cool tricks. So before I go ahead and break this layered material down for you that I've created for the bike frame, let's step one stage back and I'm going to show you how you create a basic layered material using the Pixar Layer Surface. If I go ahead here and I select the frame, I'm going to come over to this Demo Layer tab, and if I right click here on the Pixar ball, you can see that we've got this Pixar Layer Surface. And if I go ahead and select it, you have these two layers here, this Pixar Layer 1 and this Pixar Layer 2, and these are fed into the Pixar Layer Mixer, which allows you to mix 4 layers together, and you can control their opacity using this layer mask option. And if you ever needed more than 4 layers, you can daisy chain these up together. So you can take the output of one Pixar Layer Mixer and daisy chain it into another mixer, so you can effectively layer 8 materials on top of each other. And this Pixar Layer Surface, this is your main material, and it acts as a central node which you would apply to your model, and it also allows you to change global features to all your layered materials. So what you want to do is you want to think of this as like the mothership that controls the global parameters for all your connected materials. So for instance, let's have a look here at the Speculars. Now this is going to look a little different to how you're used to, but remember what I said about this layer surface being the mothership for all your other layers that come down the stream. So effectively what you're doing here under this primary specular tab is you're setting the Fresnel mode, which is artistic, and you can also set the specular mode. So effectively you may want to come here and go, well, I want all of my speculars to be GGX, and I want all of my speculars to run in physical mode. Or I may want my primary specular to run in artistic mode, but I want my clear coat to run in physical mode. So this is where you make those master decisions that feed back down through your layers. Okay, so let's go ahead here and have a look at the layered materials themselves. Now, I'm just going to go ahead here to the layer mixer, and you can see here that we have 2 layers. We have our layer 1, which is plugged into our base, which is this material here. And then we also have our second layered material here, which is plugged into layer 1. And I'm just going to disable it for the minute. So if I come here to our first layer material, you can see that as I open these parameters, they look slightly different to what the normal Pixar surface looks like. And the elements that you're missing are always replicated here in this layer Pixar surface. So things like the Fresnel mode and the specular mode are all driven again by this layer surface, and that's why they're effectively missing. So let's just go ahead here and let's add a color to this diffuse of our layer 1. I'm just going to go ahead here and make an orange. So now you can see that our layer 1 is this orange color. And if I come ahead here and I enable our second layer, you can now see that it goes grey. So the reason for this is that our second layer here is actually grey. So if I come here and change the colour, say to kind of crazy green colour, then now what you can see is that we have 2 layers. We've got our orange layer and we've also got our green layer. But the problem is we can only see the green layer because it's above the base layer. And I can prove this by disabling our layer 1. And you can now see that the bike frame goes orange because it's only showing this base layer. And because I've disabled this layer 1, it's now effectively hidden. So what you would do in the real world is you would effectively use black and white masks to control how these layers are masked over the top of each other. So I'm just going to go ahead here and I'm going to create a very simple Pixar Checker. And I'm just going to take the output of this, and I'm going to go ahead and plug this into our layer 1 mask. And you can see, if I solo this checker, you can see the black and white values control where and how these layers are masked through to each other. Now, if I go ahead here and I select my layer 1, and I activate my primary specular, and I increase the gain, and I increase the edge color, and if I also increase the face color, so now what you can start to see is that what we've added is we've added some primary specular, but only to our orange base material. Our green material over the top still doesn't have any specular. Now, one caveat to this Pixar layering surface is that if you've activated a primary specular in one layer, you also need to activate it in all of the other layers as well. Even if you don't necessarily use it, for it to be physically correct, you need to make sure that you have corresponding layers activated throughout all your material layering. So again, I'm just going to go ahead here and I'm going to increase the primary specular on our green, increase the edge color and also the face color, but I'm going to turn this down into a sort of like a clear coat. So the great thing about this layered shader is it's blending these values together. We have our rough specular on our base shader, and in our green layered material, we have this very sharp specular. So effectively what it's doing is it's blending all your roughness values together across your whole material. So this is not the most complex of layered materials, but from this little quick intro, you've got the basics of it. You've got this mixer where you can layer up materials, and then you then input masks to how you want those materials to be mixed together. So now what we'll do is let's go ahead and have a look at this bike frame. So now I've reapplied this bike frame shader. Let's have a look at a few things. Let's start here with this mothership material. So you can see here that I've declared my Fresnel mode as artistic, and I've also put my specular model as GGX. And as we learned previously, this is how all of my speculars are going to be controlled throughout all of my layers. So let's have a look at the layer mixer, and as you can see, I've got 5 layers here. And this is where having a real world reference really comes useful, because I've tried to make this bike shader the same as it would be in the real world. I have a steel base, I've then painted it, I've then put stickers over the top, I've then put a small piece of inner dirt which goes into our small crevices of my bike frame, and then over the top of the whole thing I've then added dust. And like I say, having real world references is always really important, and there's something really good about going out into the world and finding an old rusty bike in a garage and taking photos, rather than necessarily looking through the internet for kind of pictures that other people are using as references and inspiration. So let's now have a look at each of those individual layers, and I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to turn off the decals and the paint and the dust, and I'm just going to start by showing you my steel material. So this is my base steel material, and I've applied a bit of primary specular, and as you can see here, the roughness is driven by this steel texture. And I'm going to show you how I did this in a next lesson, but it's basically using the Pixar multi-texture, and it's also using a round cube. And effectively, these two nodes combined allow you to try planar map any of your objects that don't have any UVs. And again, I've tried to keep this whole lesson and this whole bike material as procedural as I can do. And then I've also applied a normal map to it as well to give my base steel a bit of bump. Okay, so that's my base. Now if I go down back to my layer mixer and I enable my paint material, this one's a little bit more complex. So let me break down for you the paint layer. And this is all driven here by this paint material. And so the first thing here is I've got some diffuse color. So let's take a look at that. And that's driven here by these 3 nodes. I have a facing ratio node, and then that is driven into this Pixar mix, which effectively mixes between 2 colors. And I've got a lighter blue and I've got a darker blue, and I use the facing ratio to mix between those 2 colors. And then I've also got this HSL node, which allows me to effectively change the hue and the saturation of my bike. So I don't have to worry about coming back here and changing this Pixar mix node, but I can use this HSL node to effectively recolor my bike and adjust the saturation and luminance however I want. So I'll just put that back to where it was. And then just coming back to this material, you can see here that I've got a primary specular and I've also got a clear coat. And so let me show you these 3 nodes which control the clear coat roughness. If I solo the end here, you can see that I've got this roughness texture, and I'm just running it through a Pixar threshold node, which allows me to make a black and white mask out of my map. And this threshold node is really useful, and I'm going to be showing you all of these options a bit more in depth in a future lesson. Now this other collection over here of nodes effectively drives all my edge breakup here on the edges of my frame, and also this bigger breakup here where I've got these paint chips. So what I've got with this little set of nodes is I'm doing the paint chips which happen on the edges of my model. So if I move around a bit, you can see here If I just draw a region, you can see here that I've got all this edge breakup happening on the edges of all my model. And then I take the output of that, and then I then blend it back over the top of another set of paint chips, which you can see here, which are these bigger ones. So I'm taking the output of these fine edge chips, and then I'm also blending over the top these bigger ones. And I created these masks by taking photos of real chips off of a bike that I found in a garage. Hence why I was encouraging you to get out and find your own bike and take your own references. So I do two things with the output of this node. The first is I plug it into my bump so that I've got a bumpy relief between where the paint chipping is coming off and the base layer underneath it. And then I also take it as a mask output, which I've plugged in to my layer 1 mask here. And this in turn has created the layer mask between my paint and my base steel. So that was the paint layer, and I'm not going to worry too much about the decals in this lesson, but I'm going to carry on and show you how I did the inner dirt material. So if I go ahead here and I enable it, and I come down to where the dirt material is, this one's a little bit more simple. If I just come into this part here of the bike, I'm just going to draw a region around it to make it a little bit faster. Okay, so this is my dirt material here, and again, it's not too complicated. I have a diffuse, which is effectively this very dark brown color. I just want to add this little piece of sort of rusty dirt that's kind of accumulated in all the crevices of the bike. And I've also activated primary and clear coat specular. Not that I'm necessarily really using them, it's just that I need to activate them throughout each of the shaders, because I did do in the paint material and also in the base steel as well. So let me break down for you this little set of nodes. And this is all to do with how I'm breaking up this dirt that's accumulated in the crevices of the model. And I'm doing that in two ways. And the first way is I'm using this Pixar dirt node, which is creating this mask within my inner crevices of my model. So then I take the output of this and I'm driving it into this threshold node, which creates a much more stark black and white map. And then I'm then blending it over the top of the output of my dirt node to create this breakup. And you can see here that I'm just applying it with a multiply. And then this is what causes me to have this dirt inside of the inner crevices of the bike. And in the same way as I did with the paint chips, I'm using this to drive the bump. And then I'm also using it as my layer mask for layer 3. Okay, so that was our layer 3, which was our inner dirt material. Now let's go ahead and have a look at the dust. I'll just enable that, and then I'm going to come down here. This is pretty much the same as what I did for the inner dirt material. I've got this diffuse here, which is a slightly lighter color. And again, I've activated specular on the clear coat and the primary. And then here, this is exactly the same as what I did for the inner. It's just that I've used a slightly different map, and I also have adjusted the dirt node a little bit more. And again, I'm using this to drive the layer 4 mask. So this is the network for the 5 layers that I've used on this bike shader. And I've tried to keep it quite simple because I didn't want to add in too many extra nodes, because it's always quite difficult to sort of explain what's going on when there's loads and loads of nodes all over the place. So as I mentioned in the intro, feel free to download this scene and have a play with it yourself. And I'd love to see what you can make with them. So either post them on the RenderMan Discord or post them on your social media channels and use the hashtag RenderMan Fundamentals. So in the next few lessons, I'm going to show you a few other nodes which I've used in this network here. So we're going to have a look at how you can use the dirt and curvature nodes. I'm going to show you how you can set up a couple of custom AOVs. And we're going to have a look at triplanar. And I'm also going to show you how you can color correct your maps and textures as well.